say that like that in public spaces because I feel like we should. Trying to find exactly how I phrase the question so that I'm not just willy-nilly.
All right, so we are now live.
We're streaming now. Okay.
We are streaming.
So I can ask the question after I go around the space and do a quick COVID check-in. Let's start with Jess. You can give us a quick update since I know you just shared a lot with us, and some of that may not be for public consumption. But if you want to give us an update, go ahead.
I'm doing better.
That's what I like about Jess. He's a man of few words sometimes, and but they're profound. Appreciate you. Dr. Elliott, how are you doing under the circumstances of COVID right now?
I'm doing pretty well. I just got off a 2-hour training for being a poll watcher. So getting ready for that. Because guys, there have been more and more reports about, incidents happening at the polls.
Yeah, I saw a message on Facebook from a high school classmate of mine who was encouraging able-bodied people to go to the polls because he had heard about a circumstance where there was some harassment to some older ladies who were voting. And I understood his energy and his sentiment. I just, hope that any approach to doing such things without being credited with doing them, that you do it carefully, because it's easy for those situations to go another direction. But I get it. It's weird out there right now. I was actually asked about that today, but you give me too much work, Dr. Elliott. I can't commit.
If you have extra time, I'll let you know how to volunteer for it.
Well, I've been asked. Literally, the person that asked me is who I'm going to ask how they're doing next, and I desire to do it, man. But Wednesday's your class, Tuesdays I don't have all day, So Kay, I'm pointing at you now. You can give him grief for me not being able to go out and protect, the voters. How you doing during this COVID
is some educational value to going out and working with COVID. I'm just saying. But I'm doing fine, healthy and okay. Just getting the kids ready to go back to school.
All right. Portia, how you holding up?
Oh, this is the time of year that I just love. I'm at the polls. I'm doing a little work there, voter protection. So taking note outside, mostly trying to see what's going on, trying to make sure people are able to exercise their right, regardless of what side they're on. And I just love this. So thank you all for engaging in that. Had a first-time voter today. And she was excited. Oh my God, I was excited to know that she was doing it. So, and health-wise, I'm fine. I'm good. Just taking all the precautions that are necessary while out there.
And yeah, I'll add, enjoy this weather. It's not too hot and it's not too cold. I see the bugs are enjoying it because they just come back out in full force. I actually went to the park today over at Barber and took a walk around, and I had already voted, but one of the ladies out there was like, "Have you voted?" So I know the energy's up and people are making sure that our voices are being heard. So I appreciate that. Meryl, how you holding up?
Pretty good, man. Yeah, pretty good. So, COVID pretty clear. I have my aunt wasn't feeling well and has been dealing with some really tough sickness and don't know exactly what's going on with her, but got a chance to visit safely out in Newport News. And then I've had some challenges, trying to get my cholesterol and stuff down. So the check engine light comes on a little bit after 40. So just a message to everyone, like, make sure you go get your checkups and do what you're supposed to do. So, but all in all, good.
I agree with that sentiment, and I'm guilty of not doing it. So I'm trying to get a little bit more consistent in taking care of my health also. Thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to jump right in because there's something coming on tonight that I feel like is going to take everybody's attention here shortly. I don't know what it is, but I'll begin with the question. and I hope everybody engages. It's something I think that's worthy of the discussion, and I don't think there's a right or wrong or a judgmental answer, an answer that opens you to judgment. But I'm interested in everybody's take that's involved in this call. So, is any public use of the N-word defensible? I asked this question because I saw an article about and I'm going to definitely be scattering it and probably not saying it correct, but it's a high level military official who was in Africa, I believe. He works overseas, and he's been suspended and may have actually lost his position because he used the N-word. The context is that he was going to visit his troops in the barracks or something, and they were playing rap music that was using the N-word. And from what I understand, he said it under the guise of, I guess engaging them based on the music they were listening to. So it's kind of a sticky situation. But it made me, that and some other things, and also my wrestling with the word over a numerous amount of years, made me decide to actually ask this question in this space. So since I've probably talked so long that I made you forget the question, is there any public use of the word that that any of you can think of that is defensible? I will call on you if I need to.
Well, definitely in art, right? So in art, it's a word. I think there are plays and musicians that are in public that can use it. So, I mean, that's an obvious one, but I gotta rack my head about the private citizen just standing around saying it. Because like in some respects, right, I mean, I don't think that saying that word in public is a hate crime if it's anybody saying, no matter who it is. So legally, it's fine. It's just like who decides when and where, I think most people wouldn't have a problem with people saying it in something that's, play, art. But yeah, that's a good one. But depending on who you're around, right? I mean, if you're a group of folks that are comfortable with you saying it, I mean, yeah,
I love
the word.
Well, I love the fact that you're wrestling with it some. We can come back because I know you probably think of a couple other things as we talk a little bit.
I don't believe in rules. I mean, I don't, but that's just the way I'm.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that's quite what an anarchist is, but I'm just messing with you, man. I know I got my face off the screen, so I don't believe participate.
Standards and all that stuff. I don't subscribe to anything. I definitely don't subscribe to Eurocentric standards and whatever that stuff is. I don't subscribe to any of that stuff personally.
Okay. So we'll come back. I definitely want to hear more. Kay, I see you unmuted yourself. So what are your thoughts?
This one's a loaded one. As a person that typically does community organizing and work with like younger groups of people, typically like millennials and younger, I think the context around it has been a little different, with the exception of when you have white folks in the room. But I will say that it's one of those things that it kind of depends on who's saying it and what the audience is. Because I know from my grandmother, that word is something that's loaded and it is completely disrespectful to pull up on grandma and start dropping bombs of stuff. And it's just like, some things, just because you can do it does not necessarily mean that you should. And I'm also very cognizant of, or I try to be very attentive when in multiracial spaces and people like to give passes to cookouts, this and that, and you open some doors with that we ain't ready to have fully opened and hashed out. there are some things with like the N word that is like for young, I know younger folks, they drop it all the time when it's just young Black folks in there, and that is what it is. And it's used as a term of ignorant and less in its racial context, which sounds really weird to some people, but that's typically how I see stuff get used. But the struggle with that is, in this country, Blackness has been monetized. The perceptions that we have as Black people has been used for Caucasian consumption for quite some time. And even when we look at the art, it's like sometimes it's like who's profiting off of that art? And it's like you got Black people dropping bombs, and then white people who are benefiting and profiting off of the dissension within the community, or the issues that come later on about whether or not it should be used. And the puppet master behind it is sometimes that same wealthy Caucasian man that if he said it in public, it might be something that could mess up his career, or her career, or their career if they don't use gender specific pronouns. So I think it's one of those things that we have to have some real in-house conversations about. And just in thinking of like age ranges and generations and how things change, how we talk about the N word now and how we talk about it. Let's say I'm 32 now, I'm a millennial, right in the middle. When I'm 50, and some of my elders may have passed over, crossed over. Like I think about what would those conversations around race look like, because what we grew up with as being acceptable, something totally different. So, and I'll drop out that sometimes the etiquette around what you should use or shouldn't use, sometimes with some generations, it's like it's more of the etiquette and the respect that you don't use it, you don't say it, it's disrespectful. But then with younger ones, they're ready to go out. They'll tear up the streets, like in not just a bad way, but like in a good way. They will go out and march in the streets, and they might be playing Cardi B while they do it, and she might be dropping bombs. So it's just like the level. I think some things are acceptable and not. I think it gets touchy, because sometimes we condemn young people for using the N word, but then you look at the pushback against racial inequities that we're dealing with now, and some of the largest civil rights movements that's happened in history happening right now. Is like, what are we choosing to place our emphasis on? Is it the cultural differences of how we use the N word, or should it be some other things that we start to talk about a little bit more in depth on? Why is it we put more weight on what feels respectable in some generations and the perception of respect, versus you have this other group that's like, we're going to say what we want to say, how we want to say it, and you are still going to respect us as we do it. And I think that there are some divisions in there that we're going to have to work out.
Let me knock you down a little bit, and this is not to push back, but it is to dissect some of what you said, because
I'm not a historian though, Felton. I'm a social justice activist, not a historian though.
I just play one on TV. But listen, I appreciate so much of what you said, especially from a generational standpoint. There's something that I, wrestle with, and that is understanding what I perceive as the history of the word being condemned and understood as a negative thing. And as you just stated, my mother is one that I would probably get some flack from for saying that, in her presence. However, when it becomes somewhat taboo, but a part of the comedy, or, Richard Pryor's probably the primary person I think of that brought it out of the Black household and the Black community. And it was taboo, and it was catchy, and it was like, oh, but even he understood at some point that he desired to walk that back some. It's a tough thing, and people are wrestling with this from a generational perspective that does not include the total history of the word. It's somewhat and so heavily saturated in hip hop, which is where I struggle with it, because it has become a beat, it has become a tune, it has become a thing that people actually shape a song around. The word is like a melody. So it's been saturated, but it has not lost its power, which is what I kind of like engaging, why I'm engaging this topic. I'm going to go to Dr. Elliott now, see what his thoughts are.
I knew you were going to call on me for this one.
Absolutely.
Well, I think what's interesting, what I'm thinking about is what Kay brought up is the generational thing, although also, which is connected to the hip hop issue, because that's where it gets used and then kids pick it up and it gets normalized or thought about in a different way than what an older generation, like what we think of. And that worries me, right? Because that's where, are you guys am I frozen? I think
No, I hear
Felton
you.
is frozen.
No,
Okay.
I just stopped my screen.
Oh, okay. Because my son, you know, he listens to hip hop, and most of his friends are black, and they use the N word plenty of times, and they've actually, like, as a joke, given him a pass and said, "Here, you can," you know. And I told Nick, never, 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 because you think in one context it's fine, you're just among your friends, but then next thing you know, you're using this, and the context has changed, and you don't understand that the context has changed, you know. And
That
people
pass
aren't going
can
to
get
take it the same way.
yeah, that pass can get revoked and he won't know why. And it's not
Exactly.
yeah, and it's that's why a lot of the times I wrestle with this. And I'm not cutting you off. I want to definitely get back to you because you are experiencing this from a generational perspective. I am absolutely certain, Dr. Elliott, that given where you come from and what you understand from a historical perspective, you would just ball up if that was something that you said in any moment, fit of anger,
Right.
comedically joking, around friends or whatever. I think I know you somewhat well enough to, but your son is coming up in a generation where it is everywhere in music. And one person you mentioned, Kay, Cardi B, you know, it used to have black folks had a little bit of ownership over the word, just a little bit. That's what some of the power with taking back conversation was. But she's not black. And there are Asian groups and there are Latino groups, and there's so many other groups that have decided that it's okay for them to say this word that still is supposed to be somewhat definable and adjusted for more palpability by Black Americans. Go ahead, Dr. Elliott, I'm sorry.
And there's so many white fans of hip hop that I know situations where the kids are white kids using the N-word back and forth, calling each other the N-word in text messages and things, in, you know, which doesn't make any sense really, but they pick that up and then they think it's cool to call each other that, you know. But I told my son too, there was some example of I think it was a college athlete who lost his scholarship because old texts from high school were made public, and I think he was using the N-word and other things like that in them. And I said, look, you can't, this is what you have to be careful of, because, you know, you think it means nothing in this moment, but this, especially in this digital age, things will be around forever, and context will change, you know. So my advice is always just don't even mess with it.
Hey, I have other stories I could tell, but Porsche, it is definitely your turn. I value your perspective, so I'm interested on your take.
Okay, so when you start talking about generational, I guess that's me. It's sort of hard to, it has been normalized. You know, the word has been normalized. We had concerns back in the 70s about it going out on the airways, and as long as it's put out there in the public, how do you talk about accountability? We can't. It's not there. And most of it is totally subjective. I don't care for it myself in certain areas, you know, and we do have to be careful how we come across when we're in different audiences and around different people. But again, how do you, it's normalized. It's just a way of life right now. Yes, it's disrespectful. It should not be used. But when you come across different cultures and it's been normalized, again, where's the accountability? Who do you hold accountable? Where does accountability start?
So
that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
The interesting word, of course, is accountability. So that would, in my opinion, dictate some responsibility, right? Which, who has it? Because I don't want to be the word police. I realized a few years ago, that as much as I did not mind communicating to white friends or white associates that it would never be cool with them to use that word around me, I noticed, even though I don't listen to hip hop very much, it's everywhere in the music. And in order for, as someone alluded to, white fans, for anything to be successful in America, it requires white fans. So hip hop is successful as it is because there's so many white fans. And I think it's the number one music genre in America. You know, wow, you know, country music, what happened? So that is a real thing.
Well, I think Black art has always been something for consumption in America. So even when Black Americans or people of color, or however you want to spell, I typically say Black folk, I'm raised in the South, but Black folk have always been a source of entertainment, either in a good way, a bad way. We've always been put up for consumption, and people value our art, even value the intellect, but it's just they don't necessarily, America as a whole doesn't value Black life. And sometimes I think about the things that we hold our young people responsible for without saying, okay, we got accountability, but where did they learn it? They didn't magically come up with the word and all its context on their own. Who passed it down to them? And at what point has America as a whole dropped the ball in what we're passing on to some of our young folk? And that's like the context of certain words have changed. And I think that the N word for younger people doesn't mean necessarily the same thing that it does to other generations. And that sounds like that makes no sense. But we've had a failure and erasure of Black history in schools. We've had, you know, kids not being taught and passed on certain things. We now, like as a millennial, I have kids in school and people fuss about, y'all need to do this with the kids and that with the kids. I'm like, you're asking kids who grew up in a failed school system that barely graduated to then pass on something different to their kids. Okay. And the system's even worse than it was when they got there. I just look at it like with accountability, we holding the kids accountable, but who taught the kids that it was acceptable and that the context of it had changed?
Let me touch on something that you're definitely headed towards, but before you got into the dysfunctional history of America, I want to make it clear. I'm totally aware of, I think what you're alluding to, the exploitation of Black talent over Black. Is everybody there? Oh gosh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You were moving and slow.
So is everybody there? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. I put the screen away, but the exploitation of Black people is definitely something that I think you're saying inside of everything else you're saying. Yeah, dysfunctional history of America, all of that stuff. But the exploitation is why the N-word becomes a melodic tune, in my opinion. It's why it has been incorporated and saturated into the music to the extent that it has. I have a historical theory behind it. And it generally begins with, it really becomes saturated in the 90s. It becomes less taboo and more of a expected thing when all forms of hip hop that are elevated, gangster rap becomes paramount to almost all other ways that the genre is performed. But I did want to address Meryl's question, and just we can put a pin in that, Kay, if you want to come right back to it. But I wanted to address Meryl's question when he asked, just to be clear, are you saying something is only successful if white people support it? It's only financially successful to the point that it is recognized at the highest levels of being undeniably the genre that is representative of America. So, but when white people spend their money on hip hop, that what validates its level of success. And I can see your face, but are you being subjective, or are you gonna like how do you define success in terms of
there's no one definition.
Okay, so I'm trying to focus on that one definition. So okay. we know that hip hop is,
well, that's either or thinking, right?
No, hip hop is by definition the top musical genre in the United States right now, right? Undeniably, correct?
I guess it sells a lot.
Okay, so there you go. If you, yeah,
I think what I do, so white supremacy, one piece of white supremacy is either or thinking, And I've had to really work on this for a long time to what I think of. I can't. I have to be able to move and have things on a spectrum. And so like it's very hard for me, just my ethos, to like say this is this and this means that. Because like if you don't have the wiggle room for spectrum, then it's hard for you to be able to, when there is a marginalized person or a group that's impacted by your judgment. Like I don't know how you have wiggle room if you have a solid this, that. You know what I mean? So I mean that's just my
Yeah.
that's where I'm coming from.
So I mean, before, and I get your sentiment completely if you're thinking about this from a broad spectrum of different areas and dynamics, but I'm totally keeping it about when something becomes successful with quotation marks in terms of financial, like, oh my gosh, this is getting platinum and diamond status. It is not possible for solely the dollars of Black folks to make something go diamond or platinum.
I agree with that.
So white folks have to be a fan of it for it to be that level and that type of successful. That's all I'm saying. The appreciation of the art is a whole nother conversation. And I think that's kind of where we can have that conversation at any point about anything, because that's totally subjective. And it is up to what, kind of rocks your boat or makes you want to dance. But yeah, what else we got? Jess, what are your thoughts on the N-word? I see you laugh.
I, like Portia, am one of those generation persons where when I was growing up, you never heard the word, especially when you listen to comedians like Bill Cosby and Nipsey Russell and all of those people along that line. They never used that word until when Richard Pryor came along. That's when you started hearing it. And with the movement of Blacks trying to get rid of that word, because that's what the slave owners used to their slaves, folks of my generation didn't like hearing those words. So I actually didn't start hearing those words again until I started teaching kids in the cities when I was living in Rhode Island. And when I heard it, I would tell them, don't use that around me. And they would tell me, well, it's a different meaning than what you used to hear it. Where they says, well, when you heard it, it's with me. We're using it with an A, which means totally, totally different. It's like, no, that's not the same thing. So
sounds too much the same, right?
Right.
Thanks, Jess. Similar story. I remember substitute teaching one time, and the student asked, could they play some music? And I said, sure. I said, but you can't play anything with the N-word in it. And every song that they literally tried to play, they couldn't play. So I told them, I said, you get three chances. And they failed 3 times. So I got to play music, which was not hard because I don't like rap that much and I played R&B. But my point is, that's how saturated it's become. Portia, you want to say something?
I was going to say, it sort of went from, Jesse, do you remember when it went from the N-word to jigger?
No.
Okay, they started talking about jigger, and I'm like, but it's the same thing. You're just trying to substitute, but it's the same thing, same connotation.
That was Jay-Z.
Yeah, I'm like, what's the difference?
That's the thing. When you say something's art, and this is Meryl, not a shout at you, but when you say something's art, you almost insulate yourself from any accountability, which is something that you were brought up, Porsche. I did want to address one thing in the chat, and I appreciate this, Kay. Tyler Perry is a fascinating entertainment guy. He was successful because he basically had put himself in a position where he had a niche audience. So the Chitlin circuit existed for a long time, and a lot of artists made a lot of money just off of Black support. But he does not become the mogul and billionaire that he is if he did not have the support of some white audiences, and that's just a fact. When you get to a certain level of status, it's not necessarily about success, it's about that dollar. And believe me, there are white fans of Medea that go see that movie and have a good time, which, you know, that's a whole nother conversation, because, you know, I'm not necessarily on board with it. So I want to play a clip for you guys really quickly, and it is all about I would think, grandmother's position on the use of the N-word. So it's not very long, and I definitely think it's worth the watch. It's one of my favorite conversations centered around the N-word. Everybody see my screen? Everybody see it?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
I believe that a word is a thing. It is non-visible and audible only for the time it's there. It hangs in the air. But I believe it is a thing. I believe it goes into the upholstery and into the rugs and into my hair, and into my clothes, and finally even into my body. I believe that words are things, and I live on them. I look at the word, the N word, which I really am obliged to call it that, because it was created to divest people of their humanity.
Absolutely.
Now, when I see a bottle come from the pharmacy, it says Poison, and then there's skull and bones, then I know that the content of that thing, the bottle is nothing, but the content is poison. If I pour that content into Bavarian crystal, it is still poison.
Well,
I'm just saying. Mind you, it's just an idea. Their words are things.
I'm your brother.
So I found it very interesting, and that's from a number of years ago, but it was something that I actually appreciated back then, because I was a fan of the Chappelle Show, but I found the gratuitous use of the N-word problematic. And that show was called Iconoclast. And what it did was pair various figures, whether it be sports or media or entertainment, whatever, and it would pair them up and they would have conversations. I advise anyone that's interested, I think you can find them all on YouTube. And in that particular episode, Dave Chappelle actually came to Winston-Salem to visit with Maya Angelou. And the conversation was really great, but that particular part always stood out to me because she's talking to a guy who was at that point in time responsible for giving CPR to the word in terms of television. It had become almost completely erased from not, of course, cable. It does what it wants to do, but from basic television. And here he was on Comedy Central, just like going wild with it. And it was something to behold, and it was funny, still a little taboo. But I recall, and I'm definitely not saying this in the probably exact way it happened, I think he left the show the way he did because one of the jokes that he was planning on doing, he felt like they were laughing more at him than with him. So there's a level of vulnerability that comes with playing in that space. And that is something that I think gives Black people a problematic positioning in terms of receiving that word, even if they think and have made it into something. They think they have made it into something that's not as harmful as it was really understood to be at one point in time, which is what his argument was. We took the power of the word. We don't say it like that. We mean it this way. And she was just like, hey, you can't redeem that, you know? And I found that fascinating. Any thoughts on the video clip or any other new thoughts? Meryl, I see your wheels turning.
Thinking about it, because the thing is, like, so art is subjective, and so like you can't define it necessarily, and the accountability comes in the reaction. So like you can do and say what you want to do. It's you can't control how people are going to react to what you say or do. So like you have to have some self-awareness of like, okay, I'm in a situation where I'm around folks and I can use this freely. It's not going to harm me professionally. It's not going to harm me for my safety. And I think that's the thing. I think the conversation really, I think, is self-awareness and judgment more than the word or using it in your music or your art or whatever. Because like, you know, it was popular in work for him. And he had one day he didn't like the reaction because he was like, oh, you're making me feel a type of way. I was getting some enjoyment out of it. And now like, oh, now I don't like it. But he could have been wired differently and done it 6 or 7 more years and been just like, I'm gonna take that check. So I think that's where the accountability comes from. So I mean, the art, I'm always gonna, my default is gonna be like, do what you do, just have good judgment and self-awareness.
Anybody else?
Fine. I actually, this might be problematic, might not, but not only was I a consumer of the Chappelle Show, I also have watched like all of his stand-up. I can't lie. I watch all of his stand-up. And some of it, it's like I don't necessarily fully agree with, but in it being art, there are some thoughts, some ideology that sometimes gets pushed that's taboo to talk about, but it's through art that it's like, yo, we might actually need to have some of these conversations. And one of the more recent stand-ups that he's done since he went to, I guess, Africa, came back, was when he and Meryl, you may have heard this joke when he said this on one of his Netflix specials. It was around when he was on the Chappelle Show. They had like a professional standards division or something that they had to go through. And he said, if you make the Chappelle Show, they call you all the time. So he was gonna say the F word in one of his, and that's the bad term for a queer person typically is how it's used, but he was going to use the F word on something. And the lady said, well, Dave, you just cannot say that on the air. And he's like, why? It's like, because you're not queer, you're not gay, you can't say it. He said, well, how can I say the N word with impunity? Why can I continue to say that and I can't say the F word? She said, well, it's because you're Black. And she was like, and he's like, I may not be queer, but I'm not the N-word either. And it kind of gave like this thought to who can say it, who can't say it, depending on how you're using it. It kind of gave me some thought-provoking moments on, yeah, we use it, but if somebody was to call us certain things, it's like, yeah, no, that's not what we doing. I've seen YouTube clips of white ladies getting knocked out in convenience stores for going in and using certain words. So I think that, again, just throwing it out there since we brought up Dave Chappelle, is that there's another context to that's just a different context on how we use it. And for me, though I respect Maya and though I know that words cut, I have been called colored. When I used to sell like beds and things like that, and a lot of the clients were older clients. And I've had people say a Negro woman's at the door. I was like, yeah, I'm leaving. I've had people say, oh, I knew a nice colored person back then. I'm like, to me, that was far more offensive than, a white homeboy in high school dropping an M-bomb because he listened to the Jay-Z. Some things are, and technically colored, we don't talk about colored like it is the same way. And we don't talk about Negro like the same way. But those words to me hold even more of an impactful punch, depending on who's saying it and how they're saying it and how they're talking to you at the time. So I'm just gonna throw it out there.
Now,
Which is
when I was working publicly, somebody came in, 90-year-old white man comes in the library and he wants to know, where's the colored girl? I was not disturbed. I'm looking at his age. I'm looking at the time period that he came up. He did not mean it. He meant no harm. My co-workers were upset because I wasn't upset. Now my co-workers were about your age, and I would have been upset had they said it because they knew better, but he didn't. And it was okay. No harm intended, none taken.
So why does that white person get a pass on what they didn't know? But for young people, we can dismiss everything that they say because some of them use the N-word with it. And some of them, in my opinion, that grew up with it, they've been called it before. Some of them honestly may not know no better. But when you correct them, you correct them. But if a white person, even if he was older and he walked in and called me colored, we're going to go ahead and fact check that right there. You done.
Look, for me, I picked my battles. That was not a battle. That just wasn't a battle. Had he been younger, yes, it would have been a battle. But an older white man, you know, growing up, he could have called me the N-word, but he didn't. He called me colored, and I was not upset. Like I say, maybe that has something to do with the maturity, you know, just being in the age that I am. But I was not upset. It did not bother me. Because like I say, the context in which he did it,
I'm coming
was
to
okay.
you, Dr. Elliott. I'm coming to you. It definitely played a role, your age and generational, all of that good stuff. The eagerness and struggle to find respectable words to label Black Americans as has been an ongoing thing. And that's a lot of what's being wrestled with here. At one point, color was actually way more respectable than the N-word that preceded it. Go ahead, Dr. Elliott.
I was just going to say, I mean, I can understand Portia not saying anything to him, but if you think about it, I mean, you probably didn't say anything because you knew if he's still talking like that, nothing you say is going to make any difference, right? But how can he get away still talking like that? You know, like it's the 50s, so much further down the road. I mean, that language is even probably earlier than the 50s, right? It's like he has to have resisted every change and he has to be like willfully ignorant of what's around him. So in a way, like to me, that's less acceptable than a kid who doesn't know any better. And you probably would say something to a kid because then you got to make it a teaching moment, right? And you're okay, I have to explain this, you know, set this kid straight. But to me, it's just kind of that person must have willingly refused to acknowledge anything has changed, you know?
So there's a really good example of that stubbornness. And I did not have this clip prepared, but you can find it, I'm sure. Richard Petty, the legendary race car driver from North Carolina. He's sitting on Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. And once again, paraphrasing, he's having a conversation and he basically says, you colored. And Brian Gumbel's like, what if I told you that that's offensive and that's not something that people like to be called, Black people like to be called anymore? And he said, you're colored because you've been colored and I'm gonna call you colored. That's all I'm ever called. Now, of course, once again, I'm paraphrasing.
He's not around colored people on a regular basis either. I guarantee he was around people other than that setting, somebody would have checked him.
But he got checked, and that's what his response was. Once again, proximity does matter. Exactly.
Somebody real.
Proximity matters, as you just stated.
Yep.
However, a willingness to be malleable matters also. You could be in proximity to a whole lot of Black folks, and if you just decide that you're gonna say what's been said in your family and you've known to be said for generations, and if it's colored, then fortunately for those Black folks around you, they may not take as extreme offense as the other word. But anyway,
the wrong one.
Well, hold on. Okay, so let's move to where we are today. African American versus Black.
That's another rabbit hole, Portia. We ain't got time for all that. We got to debate the whites.
We on that.
Okay, all right. I'm just throwing it out there.
I think
I mean, same difference.
I don't use the term African American to describe myself because I don't want to qualify my Americanness, but that's
right. And I don't either. I would have been offended by that. I just, you know, when you check the blanket, it's not African American.
I think that's definitely a whole nother discussion, which I had recently, and I don't remember the space. I think it was with somebody in a class. I don't remember. As a matter of fact, it was earlier today in my other class. The book we were reading, the author actually capitalized the being Black. So I asked that question at the end in terms of did people notice and what did they think of that practice? And of course, it led down the rabbit hole in discussing African American versus Black, and it you know, it's healthy. And ADOS is something that I'm recognizing more and more, because to be specific in identifying oneself, we are losing connective tissues to all of to Black and African American, because it's becoming all encompassing and flattening of the specific experience of descendants of slavery in this country, who are the first Black Americans. So anyway, we have reached a good time to wind this thing down, and I'm only saying that because there's some must-see TV coming on, and I don't know what it is. It's not football. I think golf has gone off. It's something happening that I can't wait to watch people. Let me mute you, Kay, since we can. That's what we're gonna watch today. We're gonna get to see somebody control people that can't control themselves, or a person that can't control themselves, which I find so fascinating.
I want to know who this is.
I don't know, man. Just flip around. Just flip the TV. Just flip the TV. You might run into it. Anybody got any departing shots before we partake in this this thing? Yeah, of course. You can say something, Kay. Unmute yourself.
I got one, and that is, and sometimes as we have conversations around, you know, generational divides and things like that in the Black community, one of the pushbacks that I try to give sometimes is the same respect or understanding of just they are how they are sometimes, but you still give them some respect and grace in the space anyway. When I've worked with people who are a little older, Black folks, and they work with white folks, they're like, well, you know what? They called you well-spoken, but they didn't mean anything by it, this and that. And it's like, there's a level of forgiveness that's supposed to be there because of how they grew up, their age and things of that nature. But then when some of the young ones come out and they might be dropping the N-bomb or it's something else, we also need to be meeting them where they are on certain things and issues. And once we can start to come together to do that more as a people, I think that the conversations can actually change towards the things that will actually create substantial changes in the conditions of the Black experience, just period, and as a whole. Because I've had more people want to talk about the experiences or how they felt about it or the decorum that's used versus the actual what can we do to materially change the conditions. So that's the only thing I'll say, is that sometimes as we give grace, let's give some of our younger ones who may be doing some things that we don't agree with, the ER versus the GA versus the this versus the that. Can we translate that level of forgiveness, acceptance, and maybe this a teachable moment? Can that also be translated towards some of the younger ones?
So key in your observation and desire to embrace, you know, making some amends in those situations, what is the easier fix when it comes to addressing the bigger issues that you want to engage in and people get caught up on the N-word? The bigger fix is for them to take a moment and understand that it's not going to be received in certain spaces, and we can have that conversation and be specific over here. But for the places that you're trying to get things done, if they come in with that energy, more than likely they're going to turn some people off, and you know that. And that white person that they may say it to is never going to receive it in the way that they intended. And I've seen it, I've witnessed it. I see these guys that get mad and tough on Facebook or on these little videos, and when they call a white person the N-word, that white person generally looking at them like, I'm not, like, you're saying something that doesn't even remotely offend me. And it's fascinating to me, and I'm finishing this white person's thought, it's fascinating to me that it doesn't offend you to say it. So there's a lot to unpack in that, but I get your gist, and I feel like, yeah, we can't get stuck in the minutia when there's a conversation that's about bigger things and somebody's getting caught up on the words being used. But I feel like we would get further along if it was just understood that decorum is necessary, and that word is a trigger. It's a trigger in many different ways and in many different settings. And it's definitely, that's why we're here right now. We're having a conversation and unpacking, and hopefully we take something with us. And, you know, next time we have a moment with a young person or even an old person that likes to say colored a lot, we can kind of engage them on the terms of,
or well spoken.
Oh,
that's also offensive to young Black folk.
All of those triggers, which sends us down a rabbit hole that Dr. Elliott and I have somewhat discussed of a lot of terminologies that are being revisited for what they may do to somebody else without us completely being knowledgeable of it.
Hey, let me share something real quick. I did this out of spite. This is my last year at Self Help. I was working, so everybody is watching this with Self Help. When our interns would come in, like most of the interns were from Ivy League schools, and there wasn't a ton of diversity. And what I used to do just to mess with folks is like I would go and like after meeting with interns, because I did orientation, I would go to the team leaders meeting and I'd say, you know what, that James Johnson, he's like really, he speaks well. He's really smart. I'm like so impressed with him, like, you know, his writing, the way he, I mean, and I was just, and folks were like, well, huh? I was just trying to see how people, it used to give me much joy. So for all the people that I did that to a self-help, you see this video, I did it to you on purpose. I wanted to have some fun.
Well, I actually had another.
Brains were exploding. Like, what do you mean? Of course he is. Like, oh, he's really articulate. So,
the satire is well received, but I actually had one more clip I was going to play, and it was of the guy who called Barack Obama clean. He's clean.
Oh,
and,
I remember that.
Yeah, and that guy ended up being his vice president, and now that guy's running for office. So yeah, I was going to play another clip. Hey, I'm glad we didn't get to it. This discussion was, I think, worthwhile, and one we'll probably have again and again. I did not touch very much on the ER versus the GA. I get it. That's even more of a conversation. That's just like the African American and Black conversation. We'll have that at another time also. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate you guys sharing your knowledge and being feeling safe to do so in this space. Everyone have a wonderful evening. Enjoy that thing that's coming up that we're gonna watch.
We'll go watch it now.
Enjoy it.
Bye,
I got popcorn ready.